While questions over the wider plan for rail transport in Kenya still remain, including this: is it possible for two lines to break even or even make a profit? That's the challenge posed by the construction of a new standard gauge railway line from Kenya's port of Mombasa into Uganda. Now, 9 years ago, the governments of the two East African countries gave the Rift Valley Railways, in which Egypt-based Qalaa Holdings has a significant stake, a 25-year mandate to run freight services. For some economists like IEA's Kwame Owino, the old railway line may have a fighting chance.
If you remember, the existing railway line has been, it's pretty old, but there's been quite a bit of refurbishment by the new investors. So that's a first. Secondly, I think many of the things we see as the share of traffic that's been falling are not necessarily the fault of the managers. It's actually problems related to evacuation from the port. So if we clean up the port and make it more efficient over time, definitely it'll come back up.
So it was a clearance problem at the port?
Most of it is a clearance problem. I mean, related obviously to extortion, basically just keeping that. So that's one. Second is also that we have right at the port a group of transport companies who have secured some kind of exclusive rights to actually be the ones to evacuate goods and all that. So there's also a competition problem at the port, partly tied back to corruption, because when you reduce competition, one of the first things that happens is it's people who have muscle that go back there. So there's a big issue right at the port, and I mean, a couple of weeks back, the president told the managing director of the Kenya Port Authority to actually clear that, and I think he needs to, because that would affect both the standard gauge railway and these other railway lines. So our problem comes from the fact that the port management is not top-notch to begin with, and those efficiencies then affect rail. The second point is that the declared numbers regarding the standard gauge railway show that it will be something like 20% more expensive relative to the old one. So if the old one, which actually is not performing as badly as people think, it's actually much better than it was 6 years ago, and is nearing, if not already reached a break-even point, it'll be very, very difficult for a railway line to actually, standard gauge railway line to make money entirely on the claim that we will get your goods to Nairobi faster, because speed is not necessarily the most essential thing for cargo movement, because people are able to align whether it's manufacturing, production systems generally, to big cargo by making sure that it arrives, provided it's regular. You then have to be here in 4 hours. So that 4 hour advantage, which has been built into the cost of the standard gauge railway, actually is going to be a disadvantage because it's a more expensive system. And I think the third issue is that according to the agreements that were made between in the initial Rift Valley line with the concessionaire, was basically some kind of cushion from competition. So if the standard gauge railway line comes in, it will be a very, very dicey thing. So
essentially, we're going to be having to, according to those terms in the contract, we'll probably have to pay them.
Yes, they'd have to be compensated. I mean, especially if they press that through sub-arbitration, they definitely have to be compensated. Now, that compensation will come from the public, not from whoever ran the other line, which means that's a cost that is actually incidental to the fact that we have a standard gauge railway line. So the cost for the standard gauge railway line is not only $3.2 billion as we believe, it's actually the additional cost of, yes.
Is it possible to have two rail lines that will run presumably at cost, at least, to break even, not necessarily make money, but break even over the next decade?
It gives the illusion of choice in the sense that we have two lines to compete, but it's a very rare thing. There are parts of the world where you have two competing railway lines on a parallel, but it's very rare. It's not a common thing, partly because railway lines take a lot, you sink in a lot of money upfront, and because of that, you'd rather expand it somewhere else as opposed to creating two parallel lines. So that's to be seen. But in terms of cost advantage, the older railway line, the Rift Valley line, actually has an advantage, which means the initial one, I mean the new railway line will actually struggle in terms of finding cargo if that happens, because for cargo movers, cost is very, very important, especially if you're moving in bulk.